Andy, my dude, have you heard of the magical website builder known as Squarespace?
Ugh, not another Squarespace ad. I feel like every podcast is sponsored by them.
Hey, don't knock it till you try it. Yes, okay, it is overhyped, but actually it lives up to the hype. Squarespace is like a website fairy godmother. With a click of a button, your site transforms into a beautiful masterpiece.
A website fairy godmother? That sounds interesting. What makes it so magical?
Well, for starters, those slick templates make anyone look like a professional web designer. Pick one, customize the colors and fonts to match your brand, and voila. Plus, the drag-and-drop Fluid engine is so easy, your grandma could build a site on Squarespace.
Well, she did knit me a lovely scarf last Christmas. Maybe website design is next.
Exactly. And when you're ready to sell your Nana's handmade scarves online, Squarespace has built-in e-commerce. Add a store with one click. Get flexible payment options. Then watch those sales roll in. And when she wants to teach others her steezy scarf skills, Squarespace's new courses feature is just the ticket. Nana can set up her curriculum and enrollments and payments in a snap and become the next e-knitting influencer.
Oh, wow, you really sold me with the grandma angle. Sign me up for that free trial.
Just go to thenextreel.com/Squarespace and transform your site into a beautiful Squarespace masterpiece.
Well, thanks, Pete. Even though it's overhyped, Squarespace actually sounds perfect for Nana's site's needs. Appreciate the warning on the ads, though. I'll brace myself next time I listen to a podcast.
Anytime. Let me know if you need any help getting that site up and running. Andy, can you believe we've almost hit 700 episodes of The Next Reel?
I know, it's crazy. And with all the other episodes in our family of podcasts, we are well over 1,200 episodes of movie conversation. It's really pretty amazing that we've gotten to have these in-depth movie chats every week for over a decade now.
And we couldn't have done it without our loyal community of film fans. Their support over the years has meant so much.
For sure. That reminds me, we should give the merch store a shout out. Buying shirts from thenextreel.com/merch is a great way listeners can continue to support the show. Plus, they get to sport our great designs.
Absolutely. I think sometimes folks forget we have a variety of shirts, mugs, phone cases, and more available. In fact, a great place to start is with a shirt sporting the Next Reel's logo.
We also have that classic Fast Times Spicoli Surf School tee, or the weirdly popular Rusty's European Tour shirt.
The one from National Lampoon's European Vacation. Why is that so popular?
Search me, but we have sold a ridiculous number of those. I guess there are a lot of Rustys taking trips to Europe?
We're always adding new designs based on movies we've covered, like our brand new design for a streetcar named Desire, featuring a streetcar named Desire. So if you want to rep your love of TNR and films, head to thenextreel.com/merch.
Every purchase helps us continue to have these weekly in-depth conversations. So visit thenextreel.com/merch today.
And as always, thanks for listening and being a part of the Next Reel community. We've got lots more great movie chats coming your way. I'm Pete Wright.
And I'm Andy Nelson.
Welcome to The Next Reel. When the movie ends,
our conversation begins.
Gangs of Wasseypur, Part 2 is over. My lover is a cold dealer.
पूरा वासेपुर बंद करवाओ। अरे सो जाओ, नहीं गद्दा जमीन पे बिछा लो। हम माँ बनने वाले हैं।
अच्छे को बोलना, अब्बू ने हालो बोला।
finally got to the part I was talking about last week.
Yeah. So last week, people may remember in our conversation, I was so excited when I finished this movie, but also a little confused by some of the characters and stuff. So I went back and started rewatching the film. You instead instantly put on part 2 and started watching it. And you got to a part that you thought like, wow, that was crazy. And as I kicked off this film, I'm like, there's something that happens at the beginning. I'm like, well, that wasn't really not much. And then I hit what it was that you were talking about. I'm like, oh, yes, this is what Pete was so excited about.
Yeah. There are a couple of sequences
Would you like to set
that
it up?
in this movie. Well, I mean, we can talk about it when we get into the meat of the show, but just know it's a big thing because there are a number of these kinds of sequences in this movie that seems to level up part 1. And I do think that after finishing part 2, I go, when I search for it in IMDb, it just shows it as one entry, Gangs of Wasseypur, at over 5 hours. And I get that now more, having finished part 2. I think I prefer it as one giant piece. This is the second half feels so deeply threaded and inappropriately broken in the middle. I like it as one movie, and I really enjoyed finishing the movie and feeling the complete sort of story all the way through the end. But I will say, I feel like there is much more sort of violence in the second half as the story amps up to its massive third act. And I was super gratified by the way this movie resolved. How did it hit you?
Yeah, it was interesting because as it ended, I instantly started thinking about the fact that does this make sense as 2 films, or does it really just seem like one film that you had a little break in the middle of watching, And I think that it did feel like there was a very natural point where they chose to end the first film and start the second film. Like it felt very natural. Like this is kind of the end of our story with Sardar as we're exploring his journey to kind of take over everything that was going on with these gangs in Wasseypur. And then the second film really follows his 5 sons, but we're really not watching all 5. It largely is 3 of the children that we're focused on. But we're kind of seeing the repercussions of everything that had gone on. So to a certain extent, it feels natural to have split it this way. But at the same time, it does feel so of one piece that I don't know. I guess I'm torn. I mean, I kind of dread the idea of sitting down and watching a 5.5 hour film. I shouldn't say I dread it. I'm totally open to it. It's just not something that I put on my schedule too often.
Yeah.
And so watching 2-hour and 40-minute films makes more sense to me. But I don't know. I don't know if I have an answer for my preference at this point. I think it works as one film. I would be very curious to just sit down at one point and just watch it for 5.5 hours. But at the same time, I do feel that there at least was what felt like a natural break between the 2.
Because what is it? 317 minutes all in? Is that right? 5 hours and 17 minutes, 3 hours and 17 minutes. Am I right about that?
Well, I don't know. IMDb says 5 hours and 21 minutes.
All right. So let's say 321 minutes. The list of 25 longest movies at the top of the list is 1900 at 317 minutes. Bernardo Bertolucci's.
There's longer movies than that. What was that movie that came out that Argentine movie that came out 2 or 3 years ago? That's like 14 hours long. I mean, obviously you're not getting
that's
movies like that too often. It's a different type of movie, but yeah.
Right. 1996 Hamlet, 242 minutes. Like once you're up in that over 200 minute kind of realm, it just feels like it's pretty easy to get to 321 for me. Like just put an intermission in there and be fine.
Yeah, right. As long as you can take a bathroom break at some point.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, because what was Seven Samurai was how long? Is that in that list?
Let's see. So 1900 Hamlet, Gone with the Wind, Once Upon a Time in America at 229, Lawrence of Arabia, 218, Ben-Hur, Seven Samurais, 207.
Okay.
Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, 200.
Is that which version is that?
Doesn't say.
Yeah. Well, anyway.
Yeah.
Obviously, there are some long movies out there.
Yeah, right. So anyhow, I just feel like once we're in that territory, I'm pro intermission. This movie felt, even as it's a generational kind of split, we'd already had, so much stuff with Faisal right at the end of this movie, and watching Faisal kind of deteriorate into drugs, and that whole experience of Faisal, I felt like picking up in the beginning of the movie where he comes to understand how his dad was killed is an important transition. And it felt jarring to me to watch it as a separate movie, because I really enjoyed watching how he transitions into the head of the family.
Well, and I think that's largely the story that we end up having. I don't know if we knew that when we watched part one, that Faisal was really where our focus was going to be. Like,
exactly.
The way that part one plays, it kind of seemed like his older brother Danish was going to be our principal character, only to have him killed off shortly after Dad died.
Yeah.
At the end of part one / beginning of part two.
Mm-hmm.
So that was an interesting setup. And to that end, I don't know. I thought it made for an interesting film. So, well, this film, when it was released over here, limited, was not rated, and probably would have been R, as the MPAA had their say.
Probably.
Maybe.
Yeah, they sometimes do their job. Most of the time's questionable.
Right. Yeah.
All right, Andy. Gangs of Wasseypur. Finishing up Gangs of Wasseypur. Anurag Kashyap directing and writing. So, talking about fathers and sons as Faisal takes over the reins of so much of the family business. He's into coal. He's into trains. He's into all kinds of crime. All kinds of crime. How do you think Faisal did as a crime lord in the family business?
I think that the setup of this story is interesting, because as this film starts, we're kind of revisiting the death of Sardar from the last film. We kind of see that death play out. We see his brother kind of taking the helm of the family business, Danish, as he's trying to avenge his father's death. He, they go after several of the people who had been involved in killing Sardar, and then Danish gets killed, and it's really Mom, right? It's Nagma who kind of freaks out on Faisal, who just seems drugged out, and it's his approach to life is so drugged out, and he has not quite realized that he inadvertently led to his father's death by listening to his friend Fazlu. And as all of those pieces come into play, and his mom freaks out on him, and everybody is like, when are you going to stand up and actually take charge of things? And it's kind of a trigger in the beginning of this film when it's like he realizes that I don't know. It was interesting to see that shift in him, and it's the scene that you were talking about when he goes after Fazlu and approaches him as a friend, only to then behead him.
Yeah,
the most beautiful way I've
so
ever
beautiful.
Seen. So beautiful,
like absurd,
so horrific.
Well,
but
describe the shot. It's amazing.
It's because it's night. He goes to see his friend. He's drugged out as usual, but and Fazlu is having like a big celebration because he had just been elected to be the one of the leaders in the town, and what he and so Faisal knows, hey, he just, because I think it was their kind of, their family uncle sort of guy who's always around, Nasir, who is kind of the voice of the story. He's our narrator. And Nasir says, "Oh, take somebody with you," and Faisal says, "No, he's my friend. I'm going to approach him as a friend." And so he goes up to Fazlu, and this is after having Mom practically want to cut his fingers off it because he doesn't want to do anything, and he says, "I'm going to do it." And this is that moment. He goes to Fazlu as a friend, brings him outside to talk, and they're having this chat, and it's backlit. So we've got this beautifully silhouetted two characters having this conversation, sitting on, I don't know, a wall, and this party going on in the background. And Faisal gives Fazlu, I don't know, whatever it is that they're always smoking, but like a little hash pipe sort of thing.
Hash.
And he gives it to him and he lights it up for him. And then he proceeds to grab him, pull out his knife, and then cut his head off. And we're watching it silhouetted, blood just spurting across the screen in like this rainbow arc. And it's all backlit. So you just get this beautiful like red splashes just spurting up and up and up. And then finally he drops the body and raises the head. And you're like, oh, wow, that was a shocker. And because, up to this point, Faisal just seemed ineffective. And this is that turning point for him when he makes a change in his direction and is going to start pushing. Now, he's not always making the smartest of decisions, like when he decides to start trusting Iqlaq. But still, he is now essentially the powerful criminal overlord of the town.
Yeah. You mentioned Iqlaq and the sort of unraveling of his ultimate sort of allegiances. And maybe it's premature to ask this question, but how did you feel about the general unraveling of allegiances in the film around Faisal? Because he develops quite a sort of cadre of folks who are apparently allegiant to him. And there are many people, or a couple of people in here who they demonstrate their allegiance to Faisal as sort of double agents and working on both sides with the Ramadir. Everybody's working sort of together and against one another. And then things start to unravel in the big third act.
Yeah, it was interesting to see because, we really got a setup in the last film of our three families, right? We had the Khans headed up by Sardar Khan. Headed up largely in the last film by Sardar Khan. It was his dad who kind of kicked things off, as we kind of see they touch on in this film. But Sardar Khan, and then in this film it's Faisal Khan as the Khans who are kind of leading. Then you have the Qureshis, which are the in the last film they were largely like the butchers and everything. And Sultan is still the family leader of them here in this film. And the end of the last film, we see those two families kind of coming together because of a marriage between Danish and I'm not going to remember. It's
there's so many.
Yeah, Shama is the one who marries Danish, and she is cousin to Sultan. And so now you suddenly have this connection between those two families, although Sultan is not happy at all with it. And, because his son, and I lose track of which one is which and how they all relate, but it's his son who actually is the unhappy one, right? Sultan ends up being okay with this marriage, but it's which is the one who ends up going after Sardar.
Oh my goodness. It's not Sagir.
Oh no, it is Sultan. Sultan does kill him. I'm forgetting which is the one who is kind of supporting which of the Qureshis
Ramadir.
No, Ramadir is not a Qureshi. Ramadir is like the politician. That's what's interesting. We kind of have these two warring families, and then you have the political family, which is Ramadir and his son JP, who he's always just telling how useless he is, which is very funny. But Ramadir and JP Singh, they are kind of the political bad guys, and so they're much harder to touch than these other two families, and they kind of come together with this marriage. And anyway, I guess to kind of get to your question about Faisal and how things unravel, it is interesting to see how there are tensions in the marriages that seem to play out, and then kind of at a certain point, like Faisal and his wife, who also is related to Sultan, it no longer seems to be a huge issue for them to be going after each other while still being accepting that they're all family. It was kind of strange to see how that played out. But then you also have Ramadir and JP constantly playing all of these people. You have Sardar's second wife and her son, Definite, who starts getting into the mix and becomes a big player. And so, I don't know, the whole thing I found to be really interesting in the scope of fathers and sons, brothers, and family business, and how, eventually we get this conversation between Faisal and his wife about how he really never wanted to be in this. He wanted to get out. He's going to try getting out. And then, as you said, it has this Godfather 3 element where it's like it just keeps pulling him back in, and he can't let go of these things. They have these needs for vengeance, and instead of just stepping away and doing something else, they have to go back and pursue it. And so many of these things seem to be kind of pushing Faisal to this point where he's going to go back and cross those lines. Yeah. And especially as he gets farther in with Ikhlaq, who is an agent for Ramadir and trying to kind of sway them. And then you find out that, Ramadir is also working with
Durga,
and through her, Definite. And so then you have this like triple agent sort of thing, as Definite is essentially working for Ramadir to clear out these people on behalf and make it look like he's working with Faisal, only at the end to be the one who kills Faisal. It was a ride, and it's very complex. But when you're talking about a 5.5 hour movie,
they have a lot of room to introduce complexity.
Yeah.
So you talk about fathers and sons. I think there's like a corollary, there's an asterisk there because part of the kind of discussion is legitimacy of children, because some of these children are not a part of the core family, especially when you talk about Definite and Durga, because it's the family that had been sort of abandoned, right? And so we have this child who is brought into the fold and made to appear legitimate, but because of he's so adept with criminality, but he ultimately doesn't feel legitimate and therefore has these ulterior motives that are going on. And I felt like his role, like his trajectory in the film Definites was fascinating to watch, and the punctuation on his storyline of the final shot of him after Faisal is after he kills Faisal in the police car, standing with his mother, looking sideways over his and looking, then facing sideways, looking at the camera, was extraordinary, chilling. Just chilling, as he exacts not only revenge for all that has been wrought on his family as a result of being made illegitimate, but also his ultimate ascension to power as ruler of the gangs of Wasseypur.
Well, and in that story thread, we also have JP, who is a part of that, because JP is the one, as we saw at the beginning of part 1 in that flash forward scene that we get to kind of see the whole thing. He's the one who sends the Qureshis in to kill Faisal at his house. And we see kind of that at the opening of part 1. We see the full thing here, and we get to kind of follow Faisal in a great oneer that kind of follows him up the stairs and up a ladder, through the roof, across rooftops, all this sort of stuff as he breaks his leg. Like, so many interesting things through that. But we get to see how JP is really playing the politics of all this too, and going after his own father, because he knows he can probably do a lot of this stuff. I mean, he puts all of that into motion, and his father is never going to let him have anything, because his father looks at him as such a complete waste of space. And so to see him at the end there with Definite as the person who's kind of behind all of this too, like, both of these sons have found ways to kind of exact revenge on everybody who had kind of put them into a space where they weren't seen as somebody who would have a role in this group.
Yeah, right. And speaking again of legitimacy, JP, just because his father sees him as a buffoon, is rendered illegitimate in the family business of politics and crime and extortion. And I think that's another example of these sons looking to establish themselves in the eyes of their fathers and in the eyes of the organization. And it makes it just that much more interesting. I think JP is an understated performance in this second half of the story. We get him much less, but when we do get him, especially as the architect of, so much of the behind the scenes, that attack on Faisal's house, I think it's really perfect. I like watching him age.
Yeah. Just a quick question about that sequence. The only thing that I felt like when I watched the first film and we see him orchestrating at the very beginning of the film, he's orchestrating this attack by the Qureshis on Faisal's house. I kind of was under the assumption that, well, his dad must be dead because he's leading this thing. And, I can't imagine his dad being supportive or part of this thing. And then as we watch this film, we realize, no, his dad's very much alive, but it never kind of comes up, did it? Or did I miss something as far as his dad ever responding or saying anything to his son about all that?
I don't think you missed anything. And my read on it is that first of all, this is a way for him to exert authority by doing this thing completely on his own. And not specifically not telling his dad, right? Just again, increasing his authority and power in the organization. But second, the perspective of his dad. I think some of this critique is performative. That I didn't find him, the way he aged, believable in some weird way. Like I would watch Ramadir as as we watch him through the ages, and the way he moved, the way he spoke, felt like he was a much older man, or that he was somehow dealing with some cognitive impairment, something like that near the end, that just felt like he was aging more than he appeared. And maybe this is a makeup thing. Maybe he just didn't, they weren't able to make him look the age that he was performing. But I struggled with that, and it kind of got in the way with understanding character intentions for me. Did you have any issue with that?
I think I largely wrote off issues with aging with a lot of these characters because you could tell that they were putting, powder in their hair, things like that. There was a point when Ramadir, when the actor seemed to kind of, they were doing kind of the Marlon Brando Godfather thing where it seemed like they were putting some cotton balls in his cheeks to kind of give him a little more of a jowly look. And so, I kind of wrote all that off as, they're clearly just trying to keep as many of these actors as they can over this vast expanse of, 80 years that they're telling this story.
Yeah.
And so it didn't bug me too much.
Did any of that get in the way of understanding Ramadir's intentions for you?
Well, Ramadir, as far as his intentions go, I think that I largely just had a sense that he was like this, he was somebody who happened to be in the right place at the right time in the first film, and the British gave him the responsibility to run these coal mines. And through that, he ended up ascending into political power, and that really protected him largely through the films, because there were a number of points when they'd say, well, we can't get to him because he's off in the capital, and he's in a place where we can't reach him. And that seemed to kind of be a thing with him at various points in the film. And it seemed to be that, there were a number of points where various Khans, whether it was Faisal or Sardar or Danish, maybe even at one point, and Definite, were all like, he is responsible for the death of my father and my grandfather, and I'm going to kill him at some point. Like, they all seem to kind of say that at some point. And so there is an element of him putting himself into a place where he is working against these people. I don't know. I guess I found him to always be doing it in that political way that worked well for him to kind of get ahead politically, whether it was with one side or the other, and seemed to be doing it in a way where he might be getting his hands dirty, but never in a way where it was direct. And so he was always kind of safe from that. And so to that end, I liked that it seemed to be saying, there are these politicians out there who are doing this sort of thing, and they're very much dirty players, but they're doing it. They're putting so many layers between them and what is happening that they're essentially kind of safe from ever being accused of anything.
Right. Well, and especially like notable, Ramadir's plan that like he plays the longest of the long games. Like his plan to undo Faisal is to have Definite released and have Faisal like rise to power and then get completely taken away by the power so that he is unable to focus when people actually come for him and aim for him. Like his game is very long and very risky, but ultimately it kind of works.
Yeah, like he's funding Durga after Sardar, after he dies, because Sardar, we had seen, had been kind of giving money to Durga to help raise Definite.
Yeah.
But there was that point when Ramadir says, he was taking care of Durga after Sardar died. He was taking care of Definite. He brought Definite into his fold. And that was what I found so interesting, because that was kind of part of the long game, because you'd have Definite kind of telling Faisal all this stuff, right? Like he's just like, oh yeah, he's totally having me do all of this stuff for him, but I'm totally on your side. Although at the end we realized, oh no, he was actually always on Ramadir's side. Like he had definitely had bought into everything that Ramadir had been pitching him, but was using that to his advantage to always stay close to Faisal. And that is very much part of that Ramadir long game that you're talking about.
Well, but wait a minute, because I think it was actually a level up from that. Like he was apparently in with Ramadir, but really he was in with JP, who wanted to see the death of everybody. And JP was, right? Like JP wanted his own father dead. And so it was ultimately these illegitimate kids, JP and Definite, orchestrating the death of both of their fathers, right?
Right. Yeah.
In an effort to take over the thing. And that was the only surprise at the end, right? Like at the end of the movie, we knew the whole thing until Definite. Like I really believed that Definite was on the side of Faisal and that his betrayal of Ramadir was legitimate. And when he turns around and the police say, anybody want a tea, to the prisoners in the back seat, and everybody gets out to get a tea, except for Faisal, I still didn't quite believe that it was Definite who was going to pull the trigger. He came out with his hands uncuffed, and I thought that was amazing, an amazing turn.
And they shoot it in an interesting way, because we're just on Faisal, and we get to see his reaction when he sees, what we essentially know that Definite is there who's going to shoot him. But we're seeing it all from, as we look at Faisal, acknowledging for the first time that this is the person who's going to kill you. He's never been on your side, and he's been playing you this whole time. And that was really interesting. I really enjoyed the way that played.
Absolutely. And I think that Definite was, I mean, he played that character so well in a weirdly understated way toward the end, because he was just this like criminal intent. He was walking, talking criminal intent. And his turn as an adult, both demonstrating that he's allegiant to Faisal and then betraying him, was but like not telegraphed at all in the most satisfying of ways. I thought that was terrific.
It was very interesting the way that he's kind of introduced, because I think it was who was he working with? I can't remember who he was working with, but we get that whole sequence when we get to see Definite essentially trying to get into the family business as he's trying to kill some of these people, and you see how ineffective he is, and he's, his gun jams, and it almost like turns into this comedy, as he is like then running, trying to get away from this guy who just won't stop chasing him, and it goes on forever. And I don't know, it just made me laugh. It turned into like this scooter chase and so much stuff going on. And I found it to be like an interesting exploration of this character as to like, are they trying to just make him seem completely ineffective? But then I also remembered, we kind of had this with Faisal also, when he goes through this whole process in the last film of learning about how things work in the business. And I guess the whole thing was like when he goes to buy the guns, only to then get arrested on the train because he's carrying guns, only to then learn that it's the gun seller who actually has this scam where he sells you guns for cheap and then has the cops arrest you and takes the guns back and then will resell them to you if you were stupid enough to come back, which he does. And he recognizes the gun because he had made a little mark on it. And that's how he knows what's going on. And he hides the guns. Anyway, it was this whole, it was great. It was this whole sequence that we have.
Yeah.
And it's a process. It's a learning process of these young people essentially being kind of idiots when they get into this industry. And maybe for some of them, it's a chance to say, you know what, this is not for me. I was arrested and I don't want to continue it. But as we see in both cases, Faisal learns from his mistakes and grows more responsible, I guess you could say, even though he never gets off the drugs. But he essentially does become a very effective leader in this crime syndicate. Same thing with Definite. He is completely ineffective in this assassination attempt. And but he uses his experience through that and ends up becoming very much this triple agent. This very much this person who's working for a lot of different parties in a way that you just don't expect. So it's really interesting to see the way that those two characters had kind of this interesting parallel.
I think so too. And you brought up some of the comedy in the show. Definite, even though not in the scene, is part of a who's on first comedic scene in this movie where they all try to figure out what the word definite means. And it's fascinating. It's like, I just found it fantastic. Like these guys talking about like definite. What does it mean? Deaf. Well, and nobody speaks English, so we don't know. Maybe deaf means he can't hear, and net means something else. Like just over and over.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I thought that was just a great little sequence. Like just the roller coaster of intents of the movie, I think is really, really great. And some of these little comedy sequences, I think we had just more of a weirdly lighthearted experience with this movie in the scope of some extraordinary violence too.
Yeah,
it does transition for me to perpendicular and tangent, right? Because we have that whole sequence where they're stealing stuff and really bugging people and they don't like it, and so they hire Sultan, or they send Sultan to go and actually defy the agreement that they had with the between the families and end these kids. And it goes to this horrific train yard, just brutal assassination.
Yeah, right.
Which actually is the event, the instigating event for the last half of this movie.
It's that shift that, and again, it's these families, right? You have these the relationships and the drama between them, and I don't know. I found it to be always interesting how, at this particular point in time, now Sultan is going to be trying to go after Perpendicular, or as long as they can find somebody they can go after who's part of that family, there are these points where where it seems to say, this is a good way to get back at them. And so it is a very interesting next step to the film, I suppose you could say.
Yeah. Well, and it takes us to the place where the first, I think in the whole epic, the whole saga, the first woman is assassinated in the course of their violence, and that changes things. And that, I think, is a real testament to the movie, right? Because there's always, just when you think there's no line left to cross, there's another line that they cross.
Yeah, and that's where they kill Mom, and in the marketplace. And I wasn't sure who that younger woman was, if she was was just a housekeeper or some other relative. I wasn't quite clear, but I know that Mom sent her, hey, run out the back, and then Mom gets shot, and then the guy runs out the back and shoots her too. And so it's this definite shift where now they're just going to kill anybody who's involved. And that's quite a turn. And it definitely takes things, I don't know, I suppose in a crime story like this, it felt eventual. It felt like, oh, yeah, eventually we were going to get to this point where they were just not going to care who they killed. And like once we get to that, which actually was interesting, because when we got to the scene where it's the attack on Faisal's house, I knew that they would kind of leave, but I guess I wasn't surprised by that point that they're attacking the entire house and okay to kill anybody who might happen to be there if they could get them, you know?
Yeah.
It really kind of gives you a darker sense of potential danger for everybody.
Well, the last movie, the big line was introducing guns, because so much of the movie takes place with these guys who just have knives and, you know, are stabbing each other, and their crimes are, but the discovery of guns, of handguns in particular, changes the game. This movie, the line is first they kill a woman, totally changes the dynamic, and then this movie becomes sort of Scarface. The final sequence of the film, the standoff at the hospital, is goes from knives 5 hours ago to a lot of guns, big automatic guns, and like a almost comedic number of guns, and the final assassination of Ramadir.
Well, the final assassination of Ramadir, which, was very funny, but also incredibly dark. But because it's like Faisal is so obsessed at this point with killing Ramadir that he wants to be the only one who puts bullets into him, and he wants to put a lot of bullets into him, to the point where he has somebody go out and get another loaded gun, bring it up to him so that he can continue shooting this dead body. Like, it was like horrifying and also incredibly humorous in the way that he was kind of obsessed with this need to do this.
Yeah, and the fact that they bring up just a line of guns and he keeps shooting them. He's very sure that Ramadir is dead before he leaves.
Very sure. Well, and it just, I found it to be an interesting and I suppose inevitable way for this film to end. You know, Faisal had started shifting criminal enterprise to working online and doing this sort of online trading and stuff that I was like, oh, okay, so he's definitely getting into the modern age and finding ways to kind of keep shifting the criminal enterprise into fitting with the times. Yet he still can't get away from the down and dirty shooting people when it comes to the end of the film. And I found that especially coming on the heels of his conversation he has with his wife when he wants to get out of this, only to realize he can't let go of these things, has to pick up not just one gun, but a bunch of guns and actually go through the process of this vengeance that he cannot let go of, even though he has found so many ways to move on in other capacities. And that's what I found so interesting about him as a character. And I don't know, just the nature of these crime stories, that a person just cannot let go of their roots to a certain extent.
Yeah. It really, I mean, it's kind of a I was going to say fun parallel. It's not a fun parallel at all, but it is certainly a parallel. Like you look at the sort of addiction to crime, the addiction to violence, and Faisal is also a drug addict, and Perpendicular is addicted to inflicting pain on others, and even kind of himself, playing with the razor blade in his mouth all the time. Like, there were some really grotesquely fun sequences of him sort of coming of age as a young criminal. Like, this movie really deals with that, like the inextricable nature of crime to family. Like, it's impossible to get out once you are so invested, once your family lineage is so invested in this lifestyle.
Yeah. And that's something I found, I don't know, I guess I find interesting with the women that they end up with. And I mean, largely the women that, we end up kind of following through the last part or this film, they are in the family already. Like, they are Qureshis, they're cousins to Sultan. And so we have this sense that they're raised in this dark underworld. But in the last film, like when we see Sardar meeting his wife, there was no sense that she had kind of come up in the world. It's just, I guess they're people from Wasseypur or Dhanbad, and so they're kind of expecting a lot of people to have this darkness. And so I always find it interesting in these sorts of films that these people, these women, end up in these relationships with these men and end up just kind of going along with it, I guess, because it leads to a better life. They have a lot more money and a lot more stuff. And maybe that's what it boils down to.
Yeah. I think everybody is addicted to it, the lifestyle in their own way. And I think that the movie is big enough to actually give you room to breathe into those observations.
Right.
The real benefit of a movie that's, 321 minutes long.
Indeed.
Music.
Oh, okay. Yes.
We had
lots of music.
There's a lot of music, and the way they used music in the first movie, we had the wedding singer guy who was kind of always at events, and he would sing songs that sort of told stories. Well, I'm just curious your thought on the way they use music this time. The music, it seems like as I'm watching the thing and the subtitles keep kind of cruising by, they're really using the music, not of the performative pieces. There are a couple of sequences, I think, where the women are singing and their songs tell a story, but just soundtrack stuff. It appears to move the story along and talk about characters in a way that feels quintessentially Bollywood without the big dance number.
Like we do have some of that same guy singing here, like at both of the funerals, he's there singing songs, right?
Oh, you're right. Yep.
At the very beginning of the film. And, but you're right. I like that. I mean, that was kind of a touching part when Faisal's in prison and he asks his wife to sing him that song. And there were a few points where it kind of created that connection to a place or a time of more comfort or childhood. Who knows what it was, but they were very interesting songs in the way that they played here. And very much, I found it to be interesting that so many ways the film was connecting to people going to the movies and really being fans of particular movies and characters and songs from these movies, or soap operas, like so many songs from soap operas that they seemed to be talking about. And every time the subtitles come up for a song, it was always, I don't know if, I'm sure this was the same case for you, but it was always like song or, Bollywood, classic Bollywood song or something like that. Like the lyrics kind of call out the fact that, oh, this is a song from some other movie or something, Yeah,
we're in homage mode right now. And I love the way that whole thing is introduced, because we have Durga. We have this perfect shot of Durga at the movies. And it's not like a giant full frame of the theater kind of with the heads down below and the screen. It's a very low shot. So you have this crazy angle of the screen of this movie and his head looking straight up because he's like in the front row. It is just a great shot that demonstrates how askew his worldview is.
Yeah.
As a relating to the movies.
Well, and it also, in a very interesting way, especially in Bollywood where so many movies are tied into songs, there was an interesting conversation that Ramadir has talking about how one of the biggest reasons that he has been able to last so long is because he doesn't like movies. Yeah. And all of these other people, they get so attached to particular actors or particular characters and songs from their particular era, and they all become their own little kind of clique because they're interested in that thing. And then the next generation is interested in this group of actors and this group of songs and movies. And because of that, they all have these different opinions and viewpoints, whereas he kind of sees himself as somebody, I don't like any of that. And I just kind of am, and they're just kind of always playing the whole field. And I found that to be an interesting point to bring up in this film that is featuring so many songs and elements from other movies.
Yeah, for sure. Last point, unrelated to movies, is about snakes.
Okay.
There's a scene when Definite goes up to a street performer who is playing his little horn to tame the cobra, and Definite grabs the cobra and begins wearing it like a boa around his neck, holding this live cobra by the head. And I'm going to tell you, Andy, nobody seems to care enough for my level of anxiety around that entire sequence. Like he walks in and everybody's like laughing at him. Oh, yeah, you have a cobra. He's here. Hold this. Gives it to Nasir, I think, or somebody. He gives it to somebody else to walk around with the cobra and hold on to it. And I find that very disconcerting. That whole sequence I thought was just too much. All the violence of the movie, the beheading, for me, it was handing a snake from person to person. I couldn't stand it.
It was the snake.
It was the snake. That pushed me over the edge.
You got to know how to hold it, Pete.
You got to know how to hold your snake. Wait, that sounds awful. Stop. And that leads us into the flashback. There's, from a narrative structure point, they do a lot of this where a character will be telling a story and then they flash back to the whole sequence, or they flash to, it's very much sort of a caper trope where you have somebody saying, we're going to have to break in to this bank. And then they show the heist. It's an Ocean's 11 thing. It's a tool used for years and years. And this, They have a couple of those sequences in this, and my favorite one is the trick that is actually in the snake scene where it shows Definite tricking the other kid to jump the motorcycle over the ravine, and the kid actually hurts himself quite badly.
The one that I thought was interesting, and more just because it was a surprise flashback to have added, was the one where we jump back to the scene in the first film where you have a group of, I think they were Qureshis, who kidnap a woman from town to kind of use her as kind of a sex slave, and then Sardar forces the main guy who did this to divorce his wife and marry this woman that he had soiled and sullied. Then through this flashback, we learned that the person that is involved, Iklak, who actually becomes this person who's kind of working with Faisal, is actually the son. And speaking of illegitimate sons, he's the son of that guy from the first marriage, who he and his mom ended up getting forgotten because of everything that Sardar did and how Sardar forced his dad to divorce his mom and marry this other woman. And so, again, like, that was just out of nowhere that flashback came. But talk about another interesting element about fathers and sons and, vengeance and everything.
Well, and recontextualizing past events, right? We didn't know the whole story, and the fact that Iklak becomes such a central figure in the undoing of Faisal and Ramadir at that point is fascinating, because we only thought it at the point that it was presented to us as the audience, it's a good deed. It's, it's saying, hey, you got to take care of your business. But, the fact that it turns out to have been, somebody loses no matter how that equation gets solved is useful. It's a good tool.
Yeah, really interesting.
You got anything else?
I think that's everything. So we will be right back. But first, our credits.
The next reel is a production of True Story FM. Engineering by Andy Nelson. Music by Mahesh Vinayakram, Oriole Novella, and Eli Kaplan. Andy usually finds all the stats for the awards and numbers at d-numbers.com, boxofficemojo.com, imdb.com, and wikipedia.org. Find the show at truestory.fm, and if your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, please consider doing that for our show. All right. How to do it award season. Same as last time.
Pretty much. I mean, we talked about this in our last conversation, because both films came out the same year, and largely, as I was kind of looking at it, it seemed to kind of be just treated as one film in the awards circuit. So all of those awards that I talked about in the last film largely are all part of the same conversation here.
Okay, so how do you handle the box office for a movie like this?
Yeah, it's tricky. What's weird is it does seem like in conversation of budgets, they did kind of split them out because they were released separately. And so I guess they were trying to track how much they each made. So I was able to kind of find some information on this. So part 2 did follow very quickly on the heels of part 1, just 6 weeks later, opening August 8th, 2012 in India after the initial premiere at Cannes, as we talked about last time. This movie garnered less of a crowd than part 1, but still barely profitable. From the overall budget of $2.3 million for both parts, this part seems to only have cost $1.2 million, at least that's how they're saying it. Very small budgets from what we're used to here in the States, especially for such an epic film. This movie earned $2.9 million or $3.2 million in today's dollars. That lands this with an adjusted profit per finished minute of almost $12,000. Again, poorer than they had been hoping for, but still profitable.
I wonder how the movie has done over the years, like in the last 10 years. Like, it feels like this is a movie that could establish itself in the long term as one of those like Indian crime classics.
I would think so. I mean, it's very highly rated on, everywhere you look, on IMDb, on Letterboxd. It seems to be something that has quite a fan base and a group of people who support it and find a lot to talk about with it. And yeah, I mean, I'm right there too. There's a lot to discuss in the course of this massive crime story.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad we put it on the list, but especially the second, getting through the second half made the entire thing so much more rewarding. I really enjoyed this movie, and I can't wait to see how you rate it.
Well, I, too, also really much enjoyed it, and I'm very much looking forward to the day when I do have a spare 5.5 hours, because I do want to sit down and just watch this whole thing as one big movie. For sure.
Do you think they'll ever release a black and chrome edition of this movie? Just the whole thing in black and white.
That would be interesting.
Yeah.
I'd be there for that. Well, we'll be right back for the ratings, but first, here's the trailer for next week's movie, The Slumber Party Massacre, directed by Amy Holden Jones, kicking off our next series, The Slumber Party Massacre Trilogy.
The basketball team is planning a party. A slumber party. The party begins at 8 o'clock.
Love it too. Do you think I'm getting better?
But be on the lookout for an uninvited guest.
Please, please.
When the pizza arrives, things really start jumping. Some people may have to leave early. But others will hang around and hang around.
Courtney, you're underage. Negative. Let's go.
I'm not going to eat the dead guy's pizza.
I feel better already. Really, I do.
But for those who stay, there'll be plenty of surprises. And non-stop action. One thing's for sure, no one's getting any sleep the night of The Slumber Party Massacre. Close your eyes for a second and sleep forever.
All right, Andy, what are you doing? Now, I told you last week that I felt like my Letterboxd rating was going to probably equate to both movies. So whatever happens here will define a change potentially to my rating from last week on Letterboxd.com. How are you handling this?
You did say that. I feel like I'm still at 4 stars for both parts. I think I found this to be a very exciting, gripping, large story. I think this is one that there's just so much going on that it would really take me viewing this, 2 or 3 more times to really get to a place where I would be happy to say, oh yeah, I would give this a higher rating.
I'm actually with you on this. I came into it thinking, okay, this one's going to move everything to a 5-star because Pete, no half stars, right? I feel like I'm going to stick with 4 stars now with the full intent of doing the 5.5 hour watch at some point. Like maybe I'll con my son into sitting down and watching the whole thing with me. Because that I feel like that whole experience might push everything up a star.
Yep, that's where I am.
All right, 4 stars and a heart.
Well, don't forget to visit thenextreel.com/letterboxd to get your patron or pro membership. And remember, it does work for renewals as well. And remember, we also have membership. And if you are interested in learning more, you can go to thenextreel.com/membership. Members get every episode a week early, plus ad-free and additional content at the start and end of some of the episodes. Plus, we do member bonus episodes. We have a ton of member bonus episodes this year, and definitely worth checking out. So again, we love that you're tuning in. And if you would love to throw some love our way, just go to thenextreel.com/membership where you can learn more. So what did you think about Gangs of Wasseypur Part 2? We would love to hear. Hop into the Show Talk channel in our Discord community where we will be talking about the movie this week.
When the movie ends,
our conversation begins. Oh, you know what we didn't talk about? Did you get a sense from this film that the crime was ever going to end in this area? Because
no.
I was reading about it, and in the reality of this area, it does sound like the mafia's downfall actually didn't come from gang wars, but what it says, it came from the differences between the widow of essentially the Ramadir character and his brothers. There were a lot of differences, and it gave people an opportunity to make space for themselves. And so it ended up kind of, the mafia all kind of ended in the area. But it did sound like, I mean, this thing was based on real stories. And so it's interesting that the film kind of depicts it in a way where, it's going to keep going just under new leadership.
Yeah, and I wonder if they were like, when would that have happened? Because this movie is telling a story that goes up through 2004, 2005, I think, somewhere in there.
And it's after that, because it's after Ramadir, the Ramadir character. Although he dies, that's another difference. He dies. He gets poisoned in his home village where he's there for an election, I believe, or he's campaigning.
Well,
and that was actually 91.
Actually, sounds fairly similar, right? It's just more bullets in the movie version.
Yeah,
but it was around the election. I think that's actually really interesting, and I wonder just how much the movie would have been able to make an observation being made in 2010-11, released in 2012. Like maybe they didn't know that crime was ebbing and flowing the way it was, kind of the mafia was kind of falling by that point.
Yeah, right.
Fascinating. Great movie.
Yeah.
Letterboxd giveth, Andrew.
As Letterboxd always doeth.
How'd you do?
I went high. I went 4 stars.
Okay. All right. I went high. So why don't you go first?
Mine is it fits into, I guess, the male fantasy and draw to violent gangster films. Srijan Sinha says, watched both in one sitting and didn't even get up to piss once, but I had an erection the entire time. Damn. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see if this holds. I had a 5-star from Sharad Srivatsan, who says, moral, don't nut in bongs. Okay, that's pretty awful. That's pretty awful. Hey, I will say, here's one more. Gulam has a 5-star who says, the satisfaction of getting revenge plus bass drops are the dopest thing Indian cinema has given me. An awesome conclusion. That is true. Awesome bass drops in this second half of the movie. So,
indeed.
Thanks, Letterboxd. It is hard to believe we have been having in-depth weekly conversations about movies since 2011.
Oh, you're telling me. Producing this show week after week is so much fun, but it does require a ton of work behind the scenes. If you'd like to help support our efforts, one easy way is by using our Originals page when shopping for books and movies that we've covered.
Your purchases made through our links give us a small commission at no extra cost to you, and allow us to keep having these great discussions.
The Originals page at thenextreel.com/originals links to the source material from all of our adapted film discussions. Purchasing through our links support the show at no extra cost to you.
In Season 12, the focus was big franchises and series. We covered both Paddington films, adapted from the beloved children's book character created by Michael Bond.
Oh, I love those films so much.
Hugh Grant is perfect.
For our Pitch Perfect series, the first film was adapted from Mickey Rapkin's nonfiction book about collegiate a cappella competitions.
It's like a short story of my life, literally. I lived college a cappella.
Sing it, brother.
I lived college a cappella.
I didn't mean literally.
You know who you're talking to, right? The Twilight Saga dominated the season with 5 films adapted from Stephenie Meyer's vampire romance novels, Twilight, New Moon, Eclipse, and the 2 Breaking Dawn parts.
Dominated with awkward romance and nonsense logic is more like it.
That too.
Another Thin Man brought us back to Dashiell Hammett's only Thin Man sequel based on other Hammett material, The Farewell Murder, that wasn't just based on the characters from the first film.
We talked about Trainspotting and its sequel, T2 Trainspotting, adapted from Irvine Welsh's novels.
I hate the sequel's name.
I do too.
And the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy adapted from J.R.R. Tolkien's epic fantasy series.
Love these.
Extended editions all the way, baby.
Plus, all the Mission Impossible films based on the 1960s TV series.
And we've still got at least one more to go.
Members got to hear us chat about The Hustler and The Color of Money, adapted from Walter Tevis's books.
Get all of these books and more at our originals page, thenextreel.com/originals.
Start your next read from the movies we've covered at thenextreel.com/originals.